Welcome back to the Cannabis Podcast for another episode of Last Weed Tonight with Philosophies, Phillip James Latham, producer over there in Los Angeles, California. Today is April 5th, and we're going to discuss a few articles that are hitting the news right now that might be affecting you wherever you are. Appreciate you being here, Philosophies, and what's going on your end?
Yeah, man, thanks for having me back. Just trying to keep my head on straight and, you know, keep my head down and keep working and just trying
Gotta
to
keep,
try
gotta keep
try
your head on a swivel, man. Gotta
try
keep
to
going.
try to keep the family alive.
Right,
But
that's all we're
yeah,
trying to do.
things are going, man. And yeah, I mean, I think that there's things to be excited about, but also things to just continue an awareness of over the course of the next year or so. So, but yeah, you want to talk about your current state of residence, yeah?
Yeah. Let's talk about this article. We'll jump right into it. I'm in Austin, Texas, so this is affecting a lot of people in Texas. Dallas, Houston, and Austin are big major cities, and they're floating a ban. So a THC ban in Texas could cut off relief for seniors and veterans, all the smoke shop owners say. And this is pretty interesting because it's getting pretty hot down here in Texas. A controversial bill that would outlaw all THC products in Texas has passed the Senate and is now in the hands of the House, sparking widespread concern among small business owners and medical cannabis users. SB 3, spearheaded by basically Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, passed the Senate and would ban all forms of THC, including Delta 8, Delta 9, and THC infused beverages, except products approved in the state's limited medical marijuana program, which they do have, but you have to basically be dying, like of cancer or something, to even be prescribed medical marijuana. But Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has vowed to push for a special session if the House fails to act. So he's very interested in banning THC, threatening to stall must pass legislation like the state budget unless a full ban is passed. Um, but while he insists the legislation is about protecting children, many local business owners and health advocates argue the ban will do more harm than good, especially to elderly and medically vulnerable Texans. Um, and just a quick aside, Dan Patrick went into a little shop trying to kind of uh, catch people not IDing and things like that. And if you can probably check out the video somewhere, and he went in there and the person ID'd him at the door, it's an fascinating exchange. He
Hmm.
says, "Can I have your ID?" And he goes, "I'm Dan Patrick." And he goes, "Okay, can I still have your ID?" And he goes, "But I'm Dan Patrick." And he goes, "Okay, but I need your ID." And so after that, before the video was released, Dan Patrick came out and said, "They don't ID." And then it came out that he literally was ID'd, even though he said, "I'm Dan Patrick." And then he also said, "Well, this is too close to a school. What about the school kids?" The school shop owner or the smoke shop owner said, "We already sent a no trespassing warning to the high school that said any high school student that is caught on premises will be charged with trespassing." So all those talking points people are ahead of now. And so, which is good. The cannabis industry is starting to do their due diligence ahead of time instead of asking for forgiveness. They're starting to just get permission first. So, anyways, I digress. Let's keep going. Um, Headhunter Smoke Shop has run the medical based. I don't want to talk about them, but she said the proposed bans already caused fear and confusion among regular customers, many of whom rely on THC products for chronic pain, PTSD, and anxiety. Skip down a couple few paragraphs. McCafferty pointed to the economic impact as well, not just medical and health. It isn't just about weed, he said. This industry generates $5.5 billion in revenue for Texas and supports 50,000 jobs. There are over 8,000 stores statewide, most of them mom and pop shops. This bill could wipe them out overnight, and that's true. According to a recent economic impact study published by the Texas Hemp Coalition, the hemp industry contributes 5.5 billion to the state's economy and supports more than 50,000 jobs over 8,300 locations. Uh,
Wow.
what's up?
I said, wow. I didn't know
Yeah, I
that it was
didn't.
that pervasive across Texas.
Right. So, I mean, that's a lot of money, and a lot of jobs. That's 50,000 jobs that would undoubtedly be cut somehow. I don't know what it would go down to. Um, a waste of resources, criticizing the state's law enforcement priorities, calling it a misuse of public safety resources, which I agree, because statistically, every state that legalizes medical marijuana, or excuse me, alcohol sales and impaired driving sales or cases go down. So these guys are just living on borrowed time. Question the logic of the ban, noting that opponents often rely on outdated and misleading arguments. They say it's protecting kids, but you don't ban an entire industry because of a fear campaign. We're not in 1955. Obviously, alcohol is way more prevalent than weed in young people, but the bill's waiting action in the Texas House, so who knows? But right now, there's a lot of uncertainty. If you want to read the rest of the article, you can check it out. We'll post it in the description. But a couple quick hits I want to show. It says research shows THC medical benefits quickly. THC-based drugs are effective in controlling nausea and vomiting in patients undergoing chemo. Cannabis and cannabinoids modestly reduce chronic pain in adults. I would say not modestly. I would say,
Modest. Was it modestly?
yeah,
Jeez.
I'd say a little bit more
Talk,
than
talk about tempered language.
right. I was going to say, way to downplay, way to downsell yourself.
Seriously.
THC can help with spasticity symptoms and multiple sclerosis, especially when administered uh, via orally. And there's growing evidence that THC may aid, it does aid, with PTSD, anxiety, insomnia, and appetite stimulation, which that's hilarious. That should have been the first thing that absolutely is. Anyway,
It's so
um,
crazy. It's so crazy to read these articles and literally read them tiptoe around like actually
they can't
proven.
say it.
It's so weird. It's like I know
You
these
can't
things
give
are
up the
true.
game.
Yeah, it's like I know these things are true, but I can't admit it.
It's like, where were you last night? Sleeping. What do you mean? Yeah, yeah. Where were you sleeping?
Yeah.
It's
What?
in my bed, in a bed, in your
Yeah.
bed, a bed, in a bed. It's like, dude,
Yeah.
stop
Jeez.
having lawyers write these articles.
Seriously.
But anyway, so for everyone in Texas, there is a petition going around to oppose this. I'll try to find the link and post it in the description so you can all sign the petition here in Texas. Now, this is two-sided for me. One side of me agrees with banning synthetic D8, D9, all those cannabinoids. You should ban all synthetic cannabinoids. But
Hmm.
if it's real, that works. But this also leads to the next question, which we talked about last time. How do you tell if it's synthetic versus organic or natural?
Right.
Now, doing this would effectively force them to create that process. So we're very early, just like in the crypto world, you're very early. They're still setting up the infrastructure for
Hmm.
this whole industry, state by state. And then once it's state by state, then they have to marry them at the top of the pyramid and make sure they're all compliant.
Right.
Because, for example, Nevada doesn't have different beef standards than Ohio, right? There's a national beef, association or milk association where all of standardized testing is uniform.
Hmm.
So sign the petition if you're in Texas. I don't know how it affects Dallas because Dallas and Austin have decriminalized uh, cannabis, and that might be why Texas is trying to turn Austin into a district so that they can control it.
Hmm.
They're trying to flip it into a district like DC,
Interesting.
which would mean the federal government would control Austin and not Texas.
Whoa. That's weird.
Right, which is a whole different podcast and a whole different rabbit hole.
Yeah, I was like, oh gosh, now we're getting into like
No, no, no,
all
no, no. We're not going to get into the weeds on that yet. So,
the
but these benefits, medical benefits, lead us into the next article which you presented, which I really, really like, and I'd love for you to go over. And it's about another form of relief. So take it away.
So yeah, I mean, being a new father myself, I obviously having been a consumer for a long time, I've tried to do my best to do research in terms of the efficacy, in terms of how it affects, pregnant women and being interested in figuring that out. But I'm always really curious to see what the science is proving in terms of the viability for this as a therapeutic for children. So when I came across this article, I was kind of excited because, as it says in the title, systematic review, cannabis extracts safe and effective in pediatric patients with autism. I know that I'm pretty sure we've talked before about, autism and, the possible causes of it and, some of the things
Yeah.
that may have become much more pervasive after, a certain act was passed in the 80s and that those entities kind of have this weird uh,
Yep.
caveat in terms of their products coming to market and not being held accountable for any of the adverse effects that they cause or may not cause. So,
The timing sucks.
talk about trying to delicately dance around semantics.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so when I came across this, I was really excited. There's a study out of Sao Paulo, Brazil. The use of cannabis extracts containing standardized percentages of CBD and THC safely mitigates autism symptoms in children, according to a systematic review of trial data published in the journal Curious. Brazilian researchers reviewed findings from 7 studies, 3 randomized clinical trials, and 4 observational studies involving 594, so almost 500 kids, younger patients with autism spectrum disorder. Study participants consumed extracts dominant in cannabidiol, CBD. Um, Researchers reported CBD-rich formulations may hold promise for managing certain ASD symptoms. Improvements were noted in anxiety, sleep quality, social effects, and behavior, although these findings varied across studies. Importantly, adverse events were generally mild and occurred at similar rates in cannabinoid and placebo groups, supporting the intervention's safety profile. The study's authors concluded more rigorous, well-designed RCTs, random control trials, are necessary to confirm these results and establish clear treatment guides for cannabinoid use in ASD. So when I came across this and I shared it with you and we were talking a little bit before we went on, I'm just happy that there's science and, research happening around, the application of cannabis and, cannabis derivative products in children because like
Hmm.
as a like I said, as a dad now, I'm like trying to think of like what's best for my child and knowing that there's going to be science-backed research in potentially like advocating for my child to be able to consume these kinds of products if they were, necessary at some point. I'm not saying like I'm sitting here like lighting a joint and passing it to my infant child. Like, please
Right.
don't misinterpret what I'm saying. But, if she developed seizures, if she, had, the need for chemotherapy, God forbid, or like anything like that, it's just, it's given me a little bit more peace of mind knowing that like I'm grateful that there's research like this happening, even if it is abroad internationally, to know that there's something that can be cited or that can be supported like this in terms of just promoting the research on a platform like this. So yeah, that's
You
kind of
you
my
did.
soapbox for
No,
for
I love it because you brought up a great point about cannabis use in pregnant mothers. And I just dropped a link in the chat. And according to Kaiser Permanente Division of Research, October 18th, 2024, there is no link found between prenatal cannabis use and early childhood disorders. So uh, I don't know if you want to pull that out and piggyback it
sure.
um, so people can see this. This is actually a pretty good article that we should show in tandem with that autism study.
Yeah, go for it.
Um, I just
Smart.
dropped it in the chat for
Yeah,
you.
it's pulled up.
Okay, cool. And yeah, so this I really like because this is a huge question for obviously mothers that use cannabis, either edibles or however they consume. But 2 large studies looked for developmental disorders and autism in children of mothers who use cannabis in early pregnancy. And new analyses of maternal cannabis use during early pregnancy found no evidence of increased risk of early developmental delays up to age 5 or of autism spectrum disorder. These studies were published in JAMA Open Network. So this is real. This is, I mean, we got to see if it's peer reviewed, but if it's published, it might be. Uh, Quote, our study on developmental delays is the first to examine clinical diagnosis of speech and language disorders, motor delays, and global developmental delays, and we looked up to age 5, longer than other studies have done, which is done by Kaiser Permanente. There are many potential health outcomes for mothers and babies related to prenatal cannabis use that are being studied, and the findings from both studies add to an early but growing body of evidence. The study team has previously reported about possible maternal risks and outcomes for infants, but results from both are also consistent with another recent study from the same researchers published in the Journal of Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics that found no increased risk of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or disruptive behavioral disorders up to age 11 in the children of mothers who use cannabis in early pregnancy. While reassuring, the findings do not negate previous research showing an increased risk of adverse maternal and neonatal outcomes related to prenatal cannabis use. We recommend that pregnant individuals avoid cannabis use during pregnancy consistent with guidelines. They're basically saying, hey, it doesn't hurt you, but we don't really know what it does.
We're not going to promote it to you and say that you should, but we're
Right. And
not
fair
going
enough.
to.
Like I'm not sitting there saying, no, like no, I mean, fair. You shouldn't promote anything harmful to pregnant mothers,
Yeah, I mean, dude, even when my wife was pregnant, she was avoiding raw fish. She was avoiding,
sugar.
dude, everything, and she was trying to be militant about how clean she was eating. I mean, she's like a healthy person in general, and doesn't want any like as few GMOs or any tainted products that she could consume. She's like avoiding them like the plague as much as possible. She tried to get, the best formula for our baby. And so yeah, like we're not and she's no longer a consumer of cannabis. So like this was not an issue that we ever had to come across. But what she did say was if I was going to consume it, she was like, please go like somewhere else. Like don't do this around me. I don't want any
Right.
impacts on the pregnancy, which I was obviously totally respectful of. And honestly, like
Right.
consumption for me went down pretty heavily both during pregnancy and since, but I digress.
Right.
Yeah, it's not like we need to sit here and say like every mom needs to be, getting as much, as many cannabinoids into her system as possible. But on the flip side of that, it's also not seeming like the consumption is going to be severely detrimental to the developmental process of, your infant or your child.
Right. Well, and I mean, right off the bat, we know for a fact if you drink during pregnancy, that's a problem. If you smoke cigarettes during pregnancy, that's a problem. Obviously, any other hard drug, cocaine, anything like that.
Yeah.
What it's basically saying is, listen, as of we know right now, kind of along with not pregnant women, they're saying like, listen, we don't really know or are telling you the benefits of it yet, but we know that it's not really as harmful as people are thinking and as we have told you that it is for
I
50,
mean,
60 years.
yeah, there's no such thing as what fetal alcohol syndrome. There's not
Right. There's no
fetal.
fetal cannabis syndrome.
Yeah. Like that doesn't
That's actually a great point because if
doesn't
there's no
exist.
reported deaths from cannabis at all, you can't have any reported infant deaths from cannabis.
Right.
So
Oh
if
man.
anything, they're just getting a good night's sleep. I'm
So
kidding. I'm kidding. Don't.
it's also so it's I mean not funny, but to kind of piggyback off of that point, we were just at a physician appointment for our daughter who's now 4.5 months or so. But she was getting some like body work and stuff done. And we were talking to that doctor about, vaccinations and, all of the different potential situations that you deal with if that's the, path that you choose to go down. And, it got us talking about SIDS and SADS and the fact that these, syndromes are literally just like catch-all terms for we don't really know what happened, but they died. So
Right.
we just had to lump it in. It's like, wait, what? Like you're not like that those two things in and of themselves have like really kind of given me great like pause where I'm like, hold on a second. So we're just gonna use these umbrella terms to
Yeah.
just, if we can't figure out what happened, it was just random. It
Well,
was
just like when
sudden.
you get shot with a bullet, but yet you have
COVID.
that, and they say it's, so, and that's real. I don't want to anyway, you don't need to digress into that,
Yeah,
but it's a lot like that where, hey, we don't know what happened, so we're just going to say natural causes,
right, right.
So I'll finish up this article. For this study, researchers looked at patient medical records for diagnosis of speech and language disorders, motor delays, or global delays. Diagnoses are made based on Kaiser's standard surveillance for developmental delays in pediatric care. Mothers were screened for cannabis use through a questionnaire and urine toxicology tests when they began prenatal care, usually around 8 to 10 weeks in gestation. No increased risk of early childhood developmental delays was found related to maternal prenatal cannabis use. Second study focused on risk of autism, which we were talking about earlier. Child autism spectrum disorder diagnoses were
Oh,
obtained from medical records and based on Kaiser's universal autism screening, and maternal cannabis use was assessed through prenatal care screening. The study found 3.6% of children were diagnosed with autism. There was no relationship found with maternal prenatal cannabis use. So I'm guessing that's probably around the norm, 3.6. I don't know what the norm
hmm.
is, but if they're probably
I don't.
saying it's probably
Yeah,
within the margin of error. The findings from both studies could be helpful to pediatricians. Um, if the studies found children exposed to marijuana were at higher risk for developmental delays or autism, we might want to monitor these patients more closely. But these findings suggest that currently recommended universal screening practices may be adequate. So um, that's a really great article. I will pin down in the description. And also note the studies were funded by the NIH, National Institute of Drug Abuse. Sorry, not NIH, but the National Institute of Drug Abuse, which we don't know how that will be affected by federal grants. But studies like this will go away um, if federal funding for research is not returned in some form. I'm not.
which actually is a good segue there, Brett.
There we go.
Because when you then look to who are going to, so this next
There
article
you go.
comes from Normal, and obviously with a change in administration, you also get the change in the personnel that's then running all the different departments and agencies and so on and so forth. So I found this to be kind of interesting. Federal article. President Trump taps former Fox News reporter for drug czar position, which again, why we're pulling people from media into regulatory agencies or any kind of governmental positions like this is kind of beyond me. I don't understand it. There's clearly people that have an educational background,
Because they're
and
intelligence assets. That's why.
I digress.
Yeah. Sorry for everyone who doesn't understand that, but when they pull a reporter from Fox or CNN or MSNBC and put them in somewhere, they're an asset. So just know that.
Likely. So when I came across this, I was like, we should probably talk about that.
Yes, sir.
President Donald Trump has chosen conservative journalist Sarah Carter to serve as the director of the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy. Carter is a former Fox News contributor with no formal drug policy, public health, or law enforcement background.
That's par for the course.
But as a reporter, Carter has investigated the role of foreign drug trafficking organizations in the illicit marijuana trade. Privately, she has expressed support for patients' use of medical cannabis and once acknowledged, quote, I don't have any problem if cannabis is legalized and monitored. I'm not saying we've got to make it illegal. So she's now awaiting,
What a convoluted statement.
right. So
I'm
she's
not saying
waiting,
we've got to make it illegal. It's already illegal.
right. Which again, like kind of confounded me. I was like, wait a minute. So like, are you advocating for
All double speak.
legalization or decriminalization or what? So then that kind of leads me into what did jump out at me as holy crap, like this goes against everything that I literally just read to you. So
Good.
uh, Congress created the Office of National Drug Control Policy in 1988 to implement and evaluate drug control policies to reduce the use, manufacturing, and trafficking of illicit drugs. By statute, the agency's director shall, quote, Ensure that no federal funds appropriated to the agency shall be expended for any study or contract relating to the legalization for medical use or any other use of a substance listed in Schedule 1, and take such actions as necessary to oppose any attempt to legalize the use of a substance in any form that A is listed in Schedule 1 and B has not been approved for use of medical purpose or for medical purposes by the FDA. So that paragraph in and of itself completely contradicts any possible endeavor or support that that person would have held potentially in their personal belief systems of advocating for legalization for one, the only or decriminalization, I think, or rescheduling. So again, we're going to get into this weird semantics game of okay, well, what does that really mean? And what are the limitations of that statute around what she's allowed to either advocate for or be a part of in terms of her advocacy? So
The next part, I don't know if you read it about the budget that she controls. I think that's the
44,
line.
yeah, yeah. So I was gonna get to that. So the next paragraph says the director serves as an advisor to the president, quote, regarding changes in the organization, management, budgeting, and personnel of federal agencies that could affect the nation's anti-drug efforts. And then here's the ringer. It oversees an approximately $44 billion budget.
Bingo. There's the punchline. That's why she was tapped.
Yeah, and then the last sentence of this article just like pissed me off. So I'll just read the whole last paragraph with two sentences. Former ONDCP directors include former military general Barry McCaffrey, who encouraged screenwriters to embed government-approved anti-drug storylines in popular television shows. Annoying. Talk about Mockingbird Media. And John Walters, who alleged, quote, finding somebody in jail for possession of marijuana is like finding a unicorn. It doesn't exist. What a bald-faced lie.
Well, let's parse that statement. For possession of marijuana, not trafficking. And now, does he say federal? No, you're right. Like there are tons of people in jail for possession, but that's because Biden pardoned them all just a few.
Right. So the unicorns have all been released.
They've all been released into the wild because Biden pardoned them all in the last 4 years. That's why he's on top of it, you know?
Crazy. So crazy.
Yeah.
All right,
So
you just sent another article though. Here we
yes,
go.
this article, we'll pin all these in the description. And we're flying through these pretty quick because we don't have much time today.
Yeah,
Um,
sorry, I got somewhere I got B.
but it leads us into this next one, which is leading to also more confusion, which is what they want. And it says former Attorney General nominee Matt Gaetz has come out and publicly said that Trump supports marijuana rescheduling.
Hmm.
So, which out of the blue, I don't know why he is starting to say this. You know, everything's on purpose, right? Um, but it just goes in. There's not much on this article, which is very interesting. It says it was written by staff. If you look at that, go look at that top right, staff, editorial writer Mayor Jane, which means this was AI.
Hmm.
Because how do I learn about the staff who wrote it and try to ask them questions, follow-up
You don't.
questions?
You
Yeah, you
might as well
don't.
just talk to ChatGPT or
Right.
Perplexity or whatever.
I love how it says staff is an editorial writer, and then you go to author staff, and then it goes, these are all AI. So you click on it, all those pictures in the next article, those are all AI generated images. So this is already, when you're reading an article, people, you got to start reading whether or not, if there's typos, probably AI. Anyway, Matt Gaetz, initially nominated by Trump for U.S. Attorney General before withdrawing, has indicated that significant marijuana policy reform is forthcoming. He highlighted President Trump's leadership is supporting the move to reclassify cannabis under Schedule 3. I'm assuming under 3. But taxation, research, legal status, cannabis industry, political landscape, all these things, huge implications. But I just wanted everyone that doesn't follow Matt Gaetz and or you don't have to like him, but that's just what he said. Now I don't know why he's saying this, and then I don't know why it's being syndicated on every cannabis platform, seemingly in tandem, unless they want you to see that he said this.
Well, it could have to do with the next thing that I brought up, uh, which I found very intriguing, especially considering some of the conversations that I've been having with people in the hemp industry over the course of the last like month and a half.
Yeah, how's that going?
It's going good. I will talk to you about that
Oh yeah,
project offline because
in person.
yeah. Oh yeah, you're gonna be here.
I'm gonna be there
Exciting.
on be there on Tuesday, man. I'm going to
Exciting.
LA. So if anybody stay tuned, I might live stream from Coachella.
Oh
Um,
wow.
2 weekends in a row. Going to see a buddy of mine. He's working there. So I
Cool.
I'm not a Coachella guy. I've never been. I'm more of a photographer, just going to document stuff. So
Should be a good time.
great scenery.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. All of Los Angeles will be there, don't worry.
All of
Except
LA will be
except
there, so there's no
except
point.
me, my wife, and my kid. We're
That's
gonna
fine.
be here at home.
The
So
parents
anyways,
stay home. Just
yeah,
kidding.
that's right. So the article says the Congressional Committee invites hemp industry experts to testify at hearing on how FDA, quote, failed to regulate products. So we talked about, the hemp industry, last time I was on, and how there's like this weird convolution between hemp products and, cannabis products or marijuana products, like even in just trying to like differentiate them in my you know articulation of this. They are kind of one in the same, so to speak, to a degree. Hemp obviously lower THC percentage and much more of a potentially agricultural crop, but it can be grown for its cannabinoid production. So that then leads us into this article of this guy. So article starts off: a congressional committee has scheduled a hearing for next week. By the way, this is from to yesterday, April 4th. A congressional committee has scheduled a hearing for next week focused on the FDA and inviting a hemp industry representative to testify on, quote, how the agency failed to approve certain products such as CBD. The House Oversight Committee hearing, titled, quote, Restoring Trust in FDA, Rooting Out Illicit Products, is set to take place on Wednesday. FDA, quote, failed to approve products and take necessary enforcement actions, resulting in a flood of illicit and counterfeit products entering the country, a memo on the hearing says. So, the meeting won't exclusively focus on cannabis issues, but among the four listed witnesses selected to testify is Jonathan Miller of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, an organization that has long criticized FDA's inaction on CBD and other cannabinoid regulations since the crop was federally legalized under the 2018 Farm Bill. Miller told Marijuana Moment on Friday he expects the hearing to be a, quote, wide ranging, but his testimony will concentrate on, quote, all the challenges the hemp industry has been having by the FDA's failure to regulate our products. So again, this goes into, hopefully there will be some distinction and, distinguishing between the agricultural side of the hemp industry that's grown for, fiber and seed and grain versus the cannabinoid derived hemp products that are what are being looked at most problematically in terms of the industry itself and the broader regulatory system. Because how are you going to figure out how to say, oh, the Delta 9 is bad? Okay, well, Delta 9 is what comes with, the majority of the cannabis products that are on the market right now in both the medical and recreational industries across all the different states that have those markets available. But what's the usurping of that is that like this whole Delta 8 craze that's now hit the market and is in, every gas station in the Bible Belt and, in all the states that don't have, legalized industries yet. So I'm really happy that this at least is seemingly like a step forward in terms of the discussion to be had with regulators about trying to make it a more clearly defined differentiation between the agricultural market and the cannabinoid market for both, byproducts of both hemp and, cannabis or marijuana as it's more commonly known in the medical and recreational industries.
It's
So,
interesting timing of this hearing because question, what's an industry that is actually going to benefit from the tariffs?
hemp,
Hemp.
hemp, hemp.
So all the stuff that we import can probably make out of hemp. Food, yes. Farming, yes. Cars, yes. Real estate, yes. Medicines, yes. Rope, et cetera, et cetera. So,
20,000 products, I think, is the last,
yep.
quote
And this is a
number
very
I saw
interesting,
quoted.
it's interesting timing because this could be a huge catalyst to grow the hemp industry's infrastructure, the cannabis industry's infrastructure, because like we said, 20,000 products that all can do anything else that plastic or anything else can do. You just don't have infrastructure set up. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's going to happen. I have no idea about the tariffs. But I do know that you're already getting huge grants and huge federal funding to switch over to farming hemp.
Yeah,
So,
that's what I'm hoping. And so to that point, one of the other things that's been brought up in the conversations I've been having was really the big lack in the industry itself right now is processors. And until you get
yep.
processing facilities online, like even if, agriculturally speaking, the hemp industry boomed and you had, thousands and thousands of farmers then, adding hemp into their crop rotations because obviously we found that monocultures are bad and soil remediation is one of the facets of hemp's abilities and blah, 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 blah. But you could have all these different farms then decide to take up hemp as a new crop rotation, but then what do they do with it?
Do you
If you,
think this could be hemp for victory too?
I, I pray, I pray, I pray.
This could be the sequel. I mean, I don't
2025,
want a
baby.
war. I mean, I don't want
Well,
trade war,
you
not
may you may not
war.
have a choice in that, but
Yeah. Well, I have a choice not to
actually,
fight.
actually, actually, you could that's a good segue into your flag again.
No. Yeah, I guess this is a good, I want to mention this.
Just a moment of mention.
Take a quick little second. I love this flag. It's the civil flag of peace. I'm a devout pacifist. There are issues that you could probably, with evidence support, convince me one way or another, sway my opinion, except for war. I'll never, it doesn't matter. Any discussion can be, any problem can be solved. So if you want to solve it, that's the problem. If you want to solve it and you don't want people to die, just like our founding fathers, when they wrote our Constitution, and this not trying to make a diatribe, but when they're in Philly, they literally like, we're not leaving this building until we have a piece of paper written. Like we're staying here 2 days. We're all going to sweat in this, wool outfits we wear
in our
and
in our wigs.
in our wigs in this no air conditioned building with a big bell in it. And then we're and then we're gonna figure it out. But like, hey, you got to respect the dedication, so I
Facts.
all these people go, just like our founding fathers, oh, it's 5:01, got to go home.
See ya.
You're like, dude, I don't want to hear it. So
Yeah,
this is a civil flag of peace
love
made
it.
in America. I will only fly this one. I will not fly the other one. Because I just
Good
my
man.
whole life since 9/11 has been a lie, really, to say the least, which is why I got so fascinated by cannabis in college and going forward. I was like, man, there's so much. This is a plant. Why is a plant so demonized?
That
And
was literally the question that I asked myself and why I went down the rabbit hole too. I was like, wait a minute, like I liked, smoking weed and everything, but then it wasn't until like I was
right,
living abroad and had a bunch of time on my hands, I was like, why was what's going on with this plant? Why
yeah,
is it so bad? Oh
right.
wait, it's not.
Oh, wait, it's not. Oh, these people suck. Like,
Hardcore. And then you're like,
like,
oh my God, the same organizations and people that were involved in the suppression of this plant also have some weird correspondence to a lot of the other global events that have shaped society. And oh my God, like
so
they're all like related or homies. And what the hell?
So I've got to tell you this because I know we've talked, and now we're kind of in the weeds a little bit, but we're going to wrap up here in a little bit because
There was one more article that I wanted to touch on, but it's like it's a fun
okay.
like
This is
opinion.
fun too, because I'm reading the book One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb, which you should all get it. There you go. Unlimited Hangout. There we go. Shout out,
That's
little
right.
plug. Whitney Webb. Keep doing what you're doing. Stay safe. And there's a interesting person mentioned that on page 16 that I had no clue, or 15, actually, it says in 1955, Harry Anslinger, the commissioner of the FBN, transferred people to San Francisco to fill vacant posts. And then it says Anslinger was a bitter enemy of Hoover and rode the rising tide of McCarthyism in the US. So it's very interesting that Harry Anslinger, who was the drug czar back in the day, who literally was the executive producer of Reefer Madness and wrote all these bills that banned everything and was like the poster boy of anti-weed, was mentioned in page 16 of One Nation Under Blackmail of how this all, that is why I chose cannabis, is because
Yep.
it's a fun way, like if you're smoking, you can smoke and investigate things and not feel so depressed.
Yeah. She's awesome. I have so much respect for Whitney.
God, can you imagine smoking I don't know if she smokes, but can you imagine like
She
smoking a
does.
joint, just listen to her talk?
She's mentioned on some podcasts that I've listened to. She's like, yep. I mean, smoking weed doesn't make you cool, but if you smoke weed, you're probably cool.
Facts.
It was kind of like
Facts.
the gist of what she had said, and I was like, yes,
Well,
she
that,
gets
that
it.
explains why I was drawn to her material.
But again, like and like you said, like I hope she stays safe and everything because it was funny. Like Ian Carroll brought her up in his episode on Joe Rogan, and she then had to go on a little bit of a social media tirade about like, excuse me,
Clear it
please
up a little
don't
bit.
be, misquoting or misrepresenting what I said. And I actually think that at some points I have actually also done the same. So I feel a little bit guilty. And I'm sorry, Whitney, if you ever
It
listen to
happens.
to this show, like, please accept my apology.
No, I
uh,
mean, it happens, but you don't have
but
millions of
in
people.
terms of the Jeffrey Epstein Mossad direct correlation, that is not a claim that she makes. She's usually
Right.
much more articulate and explicit in terms of saying that he was related to military intelligence, Israeli
Right.
military intelligence, not
Not
necessarily the
necessarily
Mossad.
Mossad.
So
Right.
sorry, Whitney.
Right. No, no, yeah, same. I mean, we get excited and kind of condense our articles and statements and stuff just to
Right.
kind of make our point because we want to get it out. But, you know, also, Joe Rogan, you should just have Whitney Webb on your show. Um,
So she just
and let her clear it up herself.
Kim Iverson just interviewed
I saw
her
that.
last week, and she actually like Kim's like, you should just be on Joe yourself, Whitney. And
I
Whitney's
know.
like, well, I have some thoughts. And she's like,
Yeah.
I think that there's reasons because like I kind of go after a lot of the people that he has on, and
Yeah.
there's controllers, and you get a podcast
Yeah.
that big that you have producers and people that kind of vet
Yeah.
guests and
Well,
so
who
on
owns
and so forth.
Spotify? BlackRock, right?
BlackRock, yeah.
There you go. And then how much did they pay Rogan? 400, $500 million?
Yeah, and
Yeah, I don't think he's going to have Whitney Webb on anytime soon.
how many times has Peter Thiel been on the Rogan Experience
Or
and
Larry Ellison.
Larry Ellison or Mark Andreessen or
Right.
like all these like PayPal mafia guys that she's basically just like, hey, you want to know who the problem people are? All of these people in Trump's administration.
But the poster boy Musk has been on quite a few times.
Oh, yeah, and she's no fan of his either. So yeah.
He might want to
Anyways,
read these. He might want to read these autism articles just in case.
yeah, true.
I'm
Anyways,
for
so.
information. I'm not implying anything about Elon Musk. I'm just for information.
Anyways, so last
Well,
oh
that got me clipped.
actually no, the last point that I did want to make from this article before we wrap things up and just have like a funny outro kind of conversation. So for the time being, hemp industry continues to face regulatory hurdles. The stakeholders blame for the crop's value plummeting in the short years since its legalization. Despite the economic conditions, however, a recent report found that hemp market in 2022 was larger than all state marijuana markets, and it roughly equaled the size or equaled sales for craft beer nationally. I thought that was a really interesting point to end with in
That is
terms
very
of just
interesting.
the market size already of
Can you read
hemp.
that again? Can you read that again?
Yeah. Despite the economic conditions, however, a recent report found that the hemp market in 2022 was larger than all state marijuana markets, and it roughly equaled the size or equaled sales for craft beer nationally.
Wow. I didn't know that or I forgot that because that is literally during COVID
Hmm.
when cannabis sales were spiking.
Yep. So with alcohol
So
sales.
yeah, everything, any
Any
drug
any
sale
any
was
any
yeah,
anything to numb or distract from
yeah.
the
And
realities.
overdoses were going way up.
Yeah, opiate
But
consumption.
that's fascinating that
Yeah,
the hemp market, whether synthetic or whatever,
right.
was larger than all state marijuana markets.
I don't know if that's combined.
I was going to say, I don't know if that's combined.
I would venture to guess it's probably individually, but the fact that they then compare it to a national craft beer market,
Well, that's what I was about to say, is that the fact that it's more than the craft beer market, which I would assume is very large,
I would think so.
um, that's pretty impressive. Also, not known. If we didn't know this, there's no way. Well, there's a way, but
Yeah, right.
less
Anybody
chance.
who read this article before us.
Right. Anybody that read this article before us knows, but this is not.
But this was from like I think yesterday. Yeah, this is from yesterday.
Oh yeah,
So
there you go.
we're hip to the game to a
There we
certain degree.
go.
Yeah.
Quasi breaking news.
Yeah. So actually, so okay, last thing, and then I do have to jump because I got to get ready for where I got to go. So I found so MJ Biz Daily. I found this kind of funny. As cannabis consumer tastes evolve, industry must look beyond potency. So basically, like, and I'll just like summarize the article. I don't need to read it to you or anything, but basically, the article says like because the industry had started focusing so much on THC and potency levels and just like get as high as possible, like as fast as possible now, like, and it's interesting that the craft beer market is oftentimes what the cannabis industry is compared to, because I think it's a little bit of a niche, more niche product, so to speak, but like that now consumers are getting a little bit more refined in terms of their palate, and that not everybody just wants to get as stoned as possible. And so now there's this interesting shift in terms of the product scopes that are now kind of catering more to a diversified experience, and or potentially like a more, pinpoint, like I want to feel like this. And I think it's also important for consumer education purposes to really start to better understand what the different terpene cannabinoid and the different what do you call it, entourage effects of all the different elements that make up a strain can do to someone's psychoactivity, physiology, whatever. So it's just I was curious to know your thoughts on like, are you still strain specific? Are you kind of just like whatever I get my hands on? Because like for me, for a long time, like I was vaping a lot, so it would be like whatever flavor I wanted, because ultimately I already knew from working in the industry, it's not like those strain specific, vapes are seriously strain specific unless you get like a concentrate that's like pressed rosin that comes straight from the plant straight into the package. Any of like the what's it called? Uh there's a what do you call this stuff? The extract that's
The distillate?
that goes in, yeah, thank you. That's the word I was looking for. Any of the distillate, like basically distillate just distills the cannabinoids, and then you add back in the terpenes to make it flavored. And beyond that, there's no strain specificity to it whatsoever. So I was always just kind of like, all right, what flavor do I want? Like
Right.
watermelon, mango, strawberry, whatever.
And are those
But I
terps
was,
synthetic or organic?
again,
Cheaper
back
to be
to another
synthetic.
point of discussion. Absolutely. So I was just curious to kind of get your thoughts, and then we can wrap up.
This is awesome because anybody that's a beer drinker, uh, when you go buy beer, do you buy for the alcohol percentage or the taste? Um,
Hmm? That they talk
usually,
about that.
usually like a combination of the both, right?
Hmm.
Like, but you don't all the time. If it was that big thing, you'd be like, okay, I'm just going to drink Everclear grain alcohol all the time. Hold on one sec. Give me 2 seconds. The cat's meowing.
Yeah, you're good. But yeah, so like to Brett's point, like whenever I'm, not that I go to bars super frequently anymore, but like, if I'm out and getting ready to have a beer, sometimes I'll want like, a lager, or a certain Hefeweizen, or a
Mhm.
stout that has a higher percentage or whatever, if I'm trying to catch a quick buzz. And sometimes it's fun to just kind of like they talk about like having beer flights where you get to like taste a little bit of a bunch of different stuff, and that's actually now one of the like retail
Now,
models that some of the
now
retail like.
imagine that you walk into a cannabis cafe and you do a sampler where they bring you half a gram of three different strains, or a gram of three. You buy an eighth, but it's like 1 gram of OG Kush, another gram of Silver Haze, another gram of Blue Dream, and you get to sample them one after another.
Mhm.
But aside from the beer analogy, which people should take into consideration. This sentence that I just Googled made me very happy to read when it said there's over 200 terpenes in the cannabis plants, but some are only trace amounts. But since there's over 20,000 terpenes that have been identified in the natural world, researchers expect to discover many more cannabis-derived terpenes in the future. So
Interesting.
that's amazing that there's over 20,000 different kind of terpenes found in all different kind of plants. So if you smell a plant, that's the terpenes you're smelling,
Mm.
the
Strawberries have terpenes. Lavender has terpenes. Like,
blueberries,
yeah.
all lemons, like
Hmm.
so all these things are great. And it's interesting because they say talk about potency because when I was working in the dispensaries, you have these people come in and like, oh bro, just I want the highest THC possible. Just give
90,
me
99%, bro.
right. You got the THC chasers, it's just like, bro, just give me the highest weed. And I mean, obviously it makes my job easy. You just give it to them. But the people
Well,
that know the entourage effect and the full flavor palette, what's the point? First off, the THC level is wrong. It's not 35 to 50% alcohol, cannabis or THC. It's just there's a 10% margin of error in the testing for
mhm.
one. And then two, you want the other terpenes because that affects all the different parts of your body. The THC is one cannabinoid. It's like if you had a beer and you're like, man, this tastes really hoppy. They put too many hops in this or whatever. It's like too much of one ingredient doesn't make sense. Also, the higher the potency of THC with a lack of other terpenes, that does lead to kind of not psychosis, but some sort of like hyper anxiety. If your THC is too much, it goes to your brain without any body equilibrium, lack of CBD, it definitely can make you anxious.
Yeah.
So,
So that's a cool, way to kind of wrap up what we were talking about
yeah,
because like I think as consumers, yeah, your consumption habits kind of get a little bit more refined the longer that you're, in the game, the older that you get, the quote wiser you become or whatever. But,
experience.
I also think that it's important for like any newcomers to the industry to be able to have a diversity of products that they could choose from that aren't necessarily like all 30% above THC. You need like we've talked about the product that was like the 20 to 1 CBD to THC pre-rolls before as like a great entry product for
Yep.
someone that's like not trying to get stoned, but is curious on like, okay, if I smoke this, how do I feel? And it's not
Yeah.
going to be overwhelming. It'll be much more kind of calming and everything like that. So, I'm excited to kind of see where this trend goes in the industry kind of at large
Yeah.
and to see what the outcomes of this committee meeting or hearing about the hemp industry is going to be after this week. So
Mhm.
may have some updates when you're here in LA in the next week or so.
Yeah. And keep an eye out on the podcast updates because I'm going to try to do one with philosophies while I'm there in person, and hopefully do a little bit of a discussion there while we're there. Maybe hit a lounge or dispensary or something like that, and stream that stuff. But we'll let you run, man. I know you got daddy duty, a lot of things to do today. So appreciate you being here with us again
Absolutely,
on
man.
April 5th, this Saturday, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And is there anything else going on you want anyone to know about? Or go follow his socials at philosophies.
I promise I'll be more active soon.
Yeah,
There's things that are in the works that I'm excited to kind of bring forward that once they're a little bit more ironed out, I will definitely be making you aware and your audience
yeah.
aware and all that kind of stuff. And you'll see a lot of content start to be
Like,
pumped here
share, and
soon.
subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble. Try to grow as much as we can. We appreciate you all being here. Stay blessed, and until next time, don't forget to tip your bud tenders.
Peace.